A gimmick is a trick or device intended to attract attention, publicity, or business. And right next to that description in the dictionary, there's a picture of the NASCAR logo. Like any other sporting league in the world, NASCAR has been on a never-ending quest to spice up their product and draw in new eyes. And the results have been amazing. Why do you ask? Gimmick is a word that has an inherently negative connotation to it, but a lot of things that we consider mainstay features now were once gimmicks when they were first introduced, so they're not all bad. So let's turn back the clock and find out which gimmicks in NASCAR really worked and which ones really didn't. And what better place to start at than the All-Star race? In fact, most of NASCAR's gimmicks, for better or worse, have originated from this event. Basically, more often than not, the All-Star race is NASCAR's way of testing out their beta features. Whether it be double file restarts, the 550 package, stage breaks, or even sliding the door numbers around for mixed results. But some have just been flat out stupid, like does anybody remember Underglow from the 2020 All-Star race? Despite being a purely aesthetic change and nothing more, this was unreasonably hyped at the time of its reveal. And I'll admit, even I was intrigued with the prospect of cool glowing lights at a Bristol night race. But the final product was so much less interesting. First of all, the lights had to be coordinated by manufacturer, which is something that the average fan couldn't possibly care less about. So a lot of the lights just clashed with the paint schemes and didn't even look that good. But perhaps even more offensive than that, they didn't even go all the way with it. The lights just barely poked out from under the backside of the car. I thought we'd see it from front to back with illuminated wheel wells and exhaust. That would have been sick. This looks like what would happen if I tried to install Underglow in my car, not professional racing teams. But yeah, this one was kind of a dud from all angles. The manufacturer should have never gotten involved in something that was supposed to be fun, and the teams definitely needed to have more creative liberties with this. Or, one alternative idea that I came up with was to have NASCAR remotely control the lights themselves. Cars in the lead lap could be illuminated in green, cars a lap down could be lit in red, and whoever's in the lucky dog position could be in yellow, which is something I think would drastically improve the at-track experience for many fans who don't have scanners or don't have a clear view of the leaderboard. Problem is, we barely have any night races anymore, so you probably just wouldn't even be able to see it, but just a thought. Speaking of the lucky dog though, it's been around long enough that it just feels like a feature at this point, but it's undeniably a gimmick, right? What actual reason is there to just give a free lap back to anyone during the course of a race aside from pure entertainment value? But that aside, I think most would agree that the lucky dog is actually a really good gimmick. Sometimes during the course of a race, bad luck just happens. Just ask Martin Truex Jr. about getting burned by things completely outside of your control. So it's nice to know there's at least an ability to turn your race around if you get hosed during a green flag pit stop or commit a penalty early in the race. Plus, it gives an incentive to keep watching if your favorite driver gets in trouble early. For instance, if you were a Dale Jr. fan in the early 2000s and you went a lap down the early stage of the race, you'd probably just flip the TV off and go do something more productive with your Sunday. But now there's at least hope that they can pull off an improbable comeback. And hey, if you think the lucky dog is bad, just remember, we're not the only ones who do it. F1 lets the entire field get their lap back when a caution comes out, or, pardon me, safety car. While IndyCar doesn't have a lucky dog rule, it does have a much more generous version of NASCAR's wave around option where lap cars not only get a lap back, but they can also pit a lap after the lead lap cars do. So if you're tired of NASCAR being the only racing series with gimmicks in it, it's not. It just has the most. Anyway, back to bad gimmicks for a minute, we have another forgotten All-Star race stinker, the Super Tires. At the 2017 All-Star race, Goodyear brought two different tire compounds in hopes of mixing up pit strategy towards the end of the race. Teams would be allowed 3 sets of the standard Goodyear tires, but 1 set of the softer Super Tire that turn laps about a half a second faster, identified by the green Goodyear logo on the side. An interesting idea on paper, but execution was anything but. During the race, it became very apparent that dirty air would cancel out any advantage that the Super Tires had to offer, which was made even worse by the fact that NASCAR mandated that any driver taking the tires had to start at the rear of the field. Because of this, the race saw only a handful of drivers actually using the alternate tire compound, and almost none of them saw any benefit. But yeah, this was a combined effort from both NASCAR and Goodyear to drop the ball, which makes it slightly more impressive as a massive failure. To get away from the All-Star race though, let's discuss another gimmick that's been the topic of conversation in recent years: dirt racing. When NASCAR entered its modern era in 1972, it seemed pretty well established that dirt racing was no more, as NASCAR would run exclusively on paved tracks for the next 40 years. But in 2013, out of seemingly nowhere, NASCAR would announce a Truck Series race at Eldora Speedway, an event that would be a massive hit both in person and on TV. Austin Dillon got a rare W, Tony Stewart looked like a genius, and Norm Benning became an American hero. Not that he wasn't one already, but now everybody finally knew about it. After several successful years of trucks racing on dirt, the question began to arise when the Cup Series would make its long-awaited return to the dirt as well. And so, finally, in 2021, NASCAR answered the call in the most NASCAR way possible, with a dirt race at Bristol Motor Speedway. We would finally get the dirt race that we were clamoring for at the cost of a traditional Bristol race date. Not exactly the deal that most of us were looking for. But the problem is, where else would be capable of supporting a Cup Series event? Eldora and Knoxville can barely accommodate Truck Series crowds as is. We don't want to cover a pre-established NASCAR track with dirt, but no purpose-built dirt track is really ready for the task either. You also have figures like Richard Petty, Kyle Busch, and even the king of dirt himself, Kyle Larson, all publicly condoning dirt racing in NASCAR. And the first 2 years of dirt racing at Bristol didn't exactly inspire much confidence. The 2021 race pretty much showed that dirt racing during the day was impossible, with poor visibility conditions not helped by an improperly watered track. In 2022, the track got a little too much water from Mother Nature, and we saw multiple issues with mud and overheating. And finally, when things were just right in 2023, it seemed like NASCAR and SMI had already made their mind up about returning to the concrete as God intended. All in all, I still enjoy dirt racing in NASCAR, and as a one-off gimmick, I don't mind it, but there are a lot of hoops to jump through to justify it. So this one just kind of sits in the middle for me personally. But returning to purely aesthetic gimmicks that have no effect on the racing, heck, this one isn't even about the cars, but what happened to Trophy Girls? I know it might be weird to consider them a gimmick, but like, really, what are they there for aside from to draw attention? Trophy Girls are a bit of an odd concept, and it's hard to come up with a reason as to why they existed to begin with. But they've pretty much been a staple in motorsports since long before NASCAR was even created. How many times have you seen photos of Bobby Allison getting kisses from girls that he definitely doesn't even know? Side note, apparently the kissing stopped in the 80s because people were afraid of AIDS and they didn't really know how it worked at the time, and so then the Trophy Girls role was just to stand there and look pretty. So, the more you know. The whole concept of Trophy Girls were then overhauled when Nextel and Sprint replaced Winston as the title sponsor. With the advent of Miss Sprint Cup, who are basically just girls dressed in fire suits like the drivers. Somehow this seems even more dystopian and corny, but whatever, to each their own. But once title sponsors changed again, Miss Sprint Cup will be replaced with the Monster Energy Girls, who I think are still around in some promotional material, but you don't really see them at the racetrack anymore. Starting in 2020, with NASCAR just becoming the Cup Series, it seemed like the whole concept of Trophy Girls has more or less been phased out. I thought maybe this was just because we get front stretch interviews now instead of Victory Lane interviews, but looking at any recent photos of Victory Lane, it doesn't seem like they're there either. Just William Byron's dumb oversized hats. Speaking of off-track gimmicks, what about the gimmick of every track needing to have a unique art piece as a trophy? The most noteworthy example of this is the Martinsville Grandfather Clock, but it's far from the only one. In 2000, Miles the Monster was introduced as Dover's official mascot, and not long afterward, he became the official track trophy too. Then came Nashville in the Busch Series with Sam Bass's art on the guitars in the early 2000s. Then Loudon the Lobster was introduced in New Hampshire in 2010. The Bristol Gladiator swords were introduced in 2014. And even Charlotte started giving out vintage Coke vending machines to the winner of the 600 in 2010, on top of the usual trophy. Some people, namely just Denny Hamlin, seem to dislike this trend, preferring a traditional trophy to these goofier, more personalized ones. But to be fair, Dennis here has a fear of lobsters, so there's that. I may not be the one winning these trophies, so maybe my opinion doesn't matter as much, but I do think it's a cool gimmick that serves to give each track more of its own identity. North Wilkesboro is the moonshine track, so why not have a trophy be a big moonshine machine? Good gimmick. Moving on. The last gimmick that I want to highlight I think has to be one of the best though, the Winston Million. From 1985 to 1997, RJ Reynolds would award $1 million to whoever could win 3 of the 4 biggest races in the schedule. The Daytona 500, the opener and richest race, the Winston 500, the fastest race in the schedule due to it being held at Talladega, the Coke 600, the longest race, and the Southern 500, the oldest superspeedway race, back when a superspeedway was anything over a mile, just so you know. Nowadays, Indianapolis or Bristol is more commonly recognized as a crown jewel than Talladega, but regardless, this gimmick did establish what the crown jewels were to begin with. Even though the Winston Million hasn't existed for more than 20 years now, these races still have an elevated status even now. The Million was only ever won twice, once by Bill Elliott in its first year, and once by Jeff Gordon in its final year. It would later be revised as the Winston No Bull 5, with Indianapolis being added as the 5th race, tweaking the rules to make it easier for drivers to win. Until Jeff Gordon trained Winston of an extra $4 million, and they said, okay, pack it up, that's enough of that. But the No Bull's spiritual successor, the Xfinity Series Dash for Cash, was introduced in 2009 and is still going today, making it the longest lasting bonus program in NASCAR's history. The only problem is, Why the heck is it exclusive to the Xfinity Series? That minor gripe aside, I think the Dash for Cash and all previous bonus money programs were awesome gimmicks. Not only did they put a larger emphasis on NASCAR's biggest races, but they also gave fans an extra storyline to follow throughout the season. It may very well be the greatest gimmick ever conceived, and it very much pains me that it's no longer around, at least in Cup. But hey, I'm sure there are loads more gimmicks out there that NASCAR's had that I definitely didn't have time to cover in this video, so let me know in the comments down below, what gimmicks do you think are the best and worst? But don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and check out dailydownforce.com for more awesome NASCAR content.